What is a community? A community is a group of people living in the same place or having something in common, like a city, town, neighborhood, or even school. There are three types of communities: urban, suburban, and rural. The first type of community we're going to talk about is rural. Rural means country or countryside. People who live in rural communities live in the country. A rural community is set outside of the city and towns. Rural communities are often farmlands. However, a rural community can also be a forest, a desert, or a prairie. Basically, any big, large area of land. So, what do you see in a rural community? People. There are few people living in rural communities. In these communities, people live far apart from one another. You'll often see farmers, but people have a lot of other jobs too, like teachers, policemen, firefighters, and doctors. Places. In a rural community, you might see a lot of farms. However, there are few buildings and businesses, and they are usually far apart. There are still some stores and schools just like any other community. Kids in rural communities go to schools close to their homes. They usually take a bus to get there. Things. Since there are many farms in rural communities, you will probably see a lot of barns and crops growing. Crops are the food that you grow in your garden or buy at the grocery store. Some crops you might see growing are corn, cotton, wheat, tomatoes, and even cranberries. To produce these crops, farmers have to do certain things, like plant them and take care of them. Lastly, in a rural community, you also see animals, such as cows, chickens, pigs, horses, and other animals such as birds, squirrels, raccoons, possums, and maybe even a bear. Our next community we're going to talk about is urban. Urban means living in the city. People who live in urban communities live in the city. An urban community is a big city or town. They are often busy and crowded. Normally, the city is the most central location in the region. It is also referred to as downtown. An example of an urban community is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Another example is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Another example is New York City, New York. And lastly, San Francisco, California. But there are many others. What do you see in an urban community? People. It is considered an urban community if there are more than 2,500 people living in the community. There are many people and they often live close together. People have similar jobs to those in other types of communities. You will see people who work for large businesses, maybe referred to as businessmen. But they are not only men, women can work for large companies in big buildings in the city too. You'll see teachers, doctors, firefighters, police, and almost anything you can think of. Urban communities have room for lots of people and lots of different jobs. Places. There are many places to go in an urban community. There are a lot more shops, restaurants, and businesses than there would be in a rural community. People may live in apartments, and kids may live closer to their schools. There are parks like Central Park in New York City, and also places such as football stadiums, baseball parks, and other sports stadiums where people can go for fun. Things. In urban communities, you will often see taller buildings. In cities, there are skyscrapers, which are very tall buildings. The tallest skyscraper in the United States is the One World Trade Center in New York City. It is 1,792 feet tall. It is the sixth tallest skyscraper in the whole world. These buildings are often used as offices that people work in. You may also see many different forms of public transportation, such as taxis, subways, and buses, but there are a lot more too. Animals. There are many people in urban communities, but there are also a lot of animals. Some animals that you might see are squirrels, rats, different types of birds, such as pigeons, and dogs and cats. Our last type of community is suburban. Suburban means a community that is located in areas that are outside of the city or a large town. Another name for a suburban community is the suburbs. What do you see in a suburban community? People. People in suburban communities often commute and work in the city. There are many people. Some live close together, some live far apart, but most live in neighborhoods. There are not as many people as an urban community, and there are more than a rural community. Kids who live in urban communities go to schools that are close to their homes. Since suburbs are located outside of cities and towns, also known as urban communities, many people travel to work there, but some stay in the community and work similar jobs to those in rural and urban communities. No matter where you live, it is important that there are community helpers and places for people to work. Places. You will see lots of neighborhoods like this where people live. These are also called housing subdivisions. They are made up of single-family homes on the same land. They are also known as cul-de-sacs. There could still be office buildings in the suburbs because not all people who live in the suburbs travel to the city for work. These are called office parks or business parks. They are smaller buildings made up of 4 to 12 floors containing different businesses. There are stores called retail stores. Retail stores include things such as strip malls, shopping malls, and chain restaurants. In suburbs, you will also see many roadways. The roadways in suburban communities are very important because they will allow people to travel throughout the community and into the city. Things. How do people in the suburbs get to work in the city? People from the suburbs get to work in many different ways. Some people who live in the suburbs but drive to the city often drive in cars, take commuter trains, or shuttle buses. Animals. You will find animals very similar to those of rural communities, such as deer, skunks and raccoons, squirrels and chipmunks, lots of birds such as blue jays, and of course, dogs and cats. What are the 3 types of communities? No matter what type of community you live in, it's your job to protect it and to be kind to those living and working around you. Remember, everyone needs a place to call home. What community do you live in?